Welcome back to the channel. Today we will be taking a look at my HO scale locomotive roster. Now we have seen a couple changes because earlier today I got my grandfather's own trains. Some of these trains were from my paternal grandfather. He used to play with these when he was little. And now they've arrived onto our area. And they'll now be running on my layouts. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the Locomotive roster update. Show you the engines that my grandfather once operated, and take a look at the same time the engines that I personally own. And in this, you'll get to see a good variety of new railroads. We no longer have just Bnsfc, we've got other railroads too. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. And down below, you can see a good lash up of all of the locomotives. And we're gonna start with the steam locomotives, and as we go along we will end up with the diesel locomotives. Our first locomotive is this steam locomotive. This was one of the many steam engines Poppy had. And as we can see from the first shot, you can see that the engine's front coupler is missing. Here's the left side of the engine. Poppy once had 3 steam engines like this. They were very small. My grandfather had a couple other steam locomotives too. Here is the backside. Once again, just like the front, the rear coupler of this engine is missing. And here's the right side of the engine. There is the top, where you can see the smokestack. And here is the underside of the engine. Here's engine number 2, another old steam locomotive my grandfather had. This is the front of this unit, and the coupler is right here. Little bit hard to move since it is an old locomotive. Here's the left side of the engine. As you can tell, this engine's got the letterings for the Pennsylvania Railroad. There are a couple Pennsylvania locomotives, and this is the first of them. This was an engine that ran during the days when the Pennsylvania Railroad once operated steam locomotives. Here is the back of the engine. Just like the first steamy, this one also has a rear coupler missing. And here's the right side of the engine. This engine would be considered a 040 steam locomotive. Here is the top of the engine. And there is the bottom of the engine. This is engine number 3, one of the fastest engines Poppy ran. It's another old steam locomotive. This time, the railroad represented is the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. This engine does not have a front coupler. And as you can tell, sometime during its life, the smokestack of this steamy broke off, which is why it no longer has a smokestack. Here's the left side of the engine. And down there, you can see the coupler. This engine only has one coupler, and that one coupler is on the rear. So if I was to run this engine backwards, it would be unable to pull cars due to the fact that it doesn't have a front coupler. Here is the back of this engine. Notice the coupler down there. Here's the right side of the engine. And underneath the cab, you can tell that one of the stickers is missing. Here is the top of the engine, with a very good detail with the coal tender. And here is the bottom of the engine. And all 3 of these engines are the 3 smallest steam engines Poppy had. They are all 040 steam locomotives. Now we're gonna move on to the bigger steam locomotives. This is the first of the big engines Poppy had. It is another steam locomotive. This is the front of the engine. Notice the dummy coupler mounted on the front. Here is the left side of the engine. And as you can tell, one of the axles for the tender is off. This one would be an 06044 steam locomotive with the tender. The engine number is ATSF 2126. The ATSF stands for the Action Topeka and the Santa Fe Railway, which is one of the predecessor railroads of Bnsfc. And if you can notice in there, you can see that there's no wire connections. This engine probably had a wire connection between the locomotive and the tender. Somehow when Poppy ran these units together, the connections broke off. Right in there is the back of the steam locomotive. And as I zoom in, you can see that there's not as much detail in the inside of the cab. And here is the front of the tender. And here is the back of the tender. There is another working coupler on the back of this tender. Here is the right side of the entire engine. And as you can see down here, one of the pistons which drives the locomotive's wheels here somehow broke off. Here is the top of the locomotive. The top of the coal tender. Notice the coal in there again. The underside of this coal tender. And here's the underside of the locomotive. And here is the last steam engine that Poppy had. And it's also the biggest one. This is the second of the 3 Pennsylvania locomotives Poppy had. And the last one to be a steam locomotive. This right here would be the front end. Notice that there isn't a coupler on the front end. There might have been a dummy coupler at one point, but somehow it broke off. Here is the left side of the engine and the tender. It is a 2x3x1 steam locomotive. And as you can see between the connections to the locomotive and the tender, the wiring and the drawbar are there, but it's all broken off. Here's the back of the steam locomotive. And yeah, it's probably not going to be much inside the cab of this guy. Here's the front of the tender. And here's the back of the tender. And this one also has a working coupler on the rear. Here is the entire right side of the engine. And here's the top of the steam locomotive. And here is the thing. If I move my finger away from the cab and turn it back up, you saw that there? The cab just popped off. That's because somewhere within the cab, the screw that puts it in place fell out. And the cab of this steam engine is no longer attached to the rest of the engine. Here is the top of the tender. More detail with the coal. And here is the underside of the locomotive and the tender. You can notice where the drawbar broke off from the tender. And that was our last steam locomotive. Now let's move on to the diesels. Our first 2 diesels are these switcher engines. Both of them were my grandfather's. And both engines are on 2 different liveries. One in the Santa Fe colors, the other letter for Canadian National. These 2 engines have got a couple differences within their coupling systems. Overall, these 2 engines would probably look good if we had them in switching operations. Here is the left side of both engines. As you can tell, on ATSF 6705, the rear coupler broke off. That event happened during transport somehow. And on a Canadian National 6712, you can notice one of the wheels is missing. Here is the back of both engines. That light above the doors are both what they sometimes call as emergency lights. And here's the right side of both engines. Here is the top of Canadian National 6712. Notice the brake fan detail in the front of the engine. And here is the top of ATSF 6705. Here is the bottom of Canadian National 6712. Notice the position where the missing wheel should be. And here is the bottom of ATSF 6705. Next up, we've got two F7 locomotives. These were the only two F7 units my grandfather had. One engine as the Campbell special livery. They wanted a train set where they would have this engine and several train cars. It was a limited edition set. And the other is dressed in Santa Fe War Bonnet colors. By the appearances right away, you'll notice the ATSF 4015 has the windows missing, and during shipment, the front coupler broke off. Here is the left side of the Campbell F7 unit. Notice the detail on the engine. This engine's got a very similar paint scheme to the Southern Railway F7s, as well as the F7s that ran on Norfolk Southern prior to their eventual retirement from the roster. And here's ATSF 4015's left side. Here are the backs of both F7 units. As you can see, both engines are missing the rear couplers. Here is the right side of the Campbell F7 unit. And here's ATSF 4015's right side. The Campbell unit's top. And here is the top of ATSF 4015. the Campbell unit's bottom, and here is the bottom of ATSF 4015. Here is the next engine. This is the last Pennsylvania locomotive Poppy had. It is a green switcher unit, one of the SW7s. This is the front of the locomotive. Notice that the coupler's been broken off in several areas. Here is the left side of the Pennsylvania SW7. This engine is painted in the Pennsylvania Railroad's green paint scheme, unlike the other Pennsylvania units, which were painted in a brownish color. Here's the back of the Pennsylvania Railroad switcher. Notice the missing coupler. And here's the right side of the Pennsylvania switcher. Here's the SW7's top. And here's the SW7's bottom. And there's a thing said about one of these trucks. It's broken off at one end to the point where if I take that part off, the axle assemblies within that truck will fall out. And here is the last of Poppy's trains. This is the last engine I received that was Poppy's. It is a Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy GP20, painted in Burlington route colors. Here is the locomotive's front. Here's the engine's left side. Notice that the fuel tank detail on this engine is missing. The missing detail part there is something you probably would never see on any other locomotive. Here is the tail end of the locomotive. And here's the GP20's right side. The locomotive's top. And here's the locomotive's bottom. By looking from this shot, you can see the wires that are inside the car body. Alright, and that is the last of Poppy's trains. Up next, my trains. For my side, we're going to start off with my two Walters Mainline Gp7s. Not much has changed between these two. We've got Bnsfc 3820 in the Heritage 1 scheme, and Bnsfc 1600 in H4. Not much has changed on this side either. although somehow the horns on the top broke off. Here are the tail or rear ends of the locomotives. And here are the engine's right sides. This next HO scale unit is the newest engine in model year, Bnsf C44-9W1096. Not much has changed on this engine since the last update. And a couple of paint chips that have changed here and there. And here is the last engine. And it is the newest engine I've received as a set. I actually bought this engine. It is a Mainline Gp7s. This engine is to represent Bnsf 3001. The real Bnsf 3001 is a Gp40-2R. This is the front of the engine. Here's the left side. Notice down in the left corner it says Gp40-2R, because this engine is supposed to model off the real Bnsf 3001. Here is the locomotive's rear. The GP40's right side. Here is the engine's top. And here's the GP40's bottom. And that was the Locomotive roster update. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And until next time, this is BSNCJL. Catch you next time. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this presentation of the Bnsfc network.
If you want to watch another video on the channel, click on any of these videos in the corners of the screen. If you want to check out the channel, click on the channel icon at the bottom of the screen. And don't forget to like the video, comment, subscribe to our channel, and press the notification bell. Until we see each other again, this is the Bnsfc team, signing off.
Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you all next time.